everybody and welcome to my channel. My name is Nicola and I blog over at thefrugalcottage.com all about budgeting, money saving and investing. Now today's video is all about what dividends are. I post monthly dividend income updates on my channel and I get lots of messages about how to get started. So I thought I would share with you today the basics of that. Don't forget to like and subscribe and let's get started. So as a dividend investor, I invest in stocks and shares within an ISA, in companies and funds that pay out dividends. So there are two different types of investments that I have that pay out income, mainly twice a year, sometimes once a year, occasionally 4 times a year. So the whole point of dividends is to create an income, and you can either take that income and have it paid into your bank account, or you can reinvest, which is called the DRIP method. But either way, dividends are essentially another income source. So you're creating a passive income stream. But what actually are dividends? So dividends are payments to shareholders of a company. So say you had 100 shares in Disney, for example, just as an example. Twice a year they would look at their kind of balance sheet, so to speak, and work out whether or not they could give their own investors, so the people who have bought the shares, any kind of dividend based on their profit. So good companies obviously make a profit and they have different expenses, but dividends are factored into that, and it is a small amount of money for them that they pay back to investment into shareholders, so like me or you, twice a year the majority of the time. So say you held 100 shares in Disney and they paid out £1 per share per year. So in that year, probably split between 2 payments, that would give you back £100 in dividend income. Now then, obviously, the more stocks you hold, the more shares you bought, the more companies or funds you invest in, the more dividend income that you receive. And there are certain things to look out for when you are looking at dividends. So the first, and at the moment this is a bit different because the percentages of dividends look high in comparison to maybe what they would be normally, but you need to look at something called the dividend yield. And ideally you'd be aiming for something above 4% for a dividend yield. So when you look at a company, the financials of that, so I use Hargreaves Lansdown for my investments, and when you click on a different company, their page, at a glance page at the top, it will say dividend yield and give a percentage. Now at the moment, because the markets are so down compared to normal, some dividend yields are in the double figures, so 10, 11, 12%. That normally isn't actually a good sign because perhaps their balance sheet isn't quite where it should be. However, if you aim for 4 or 5% as a baseline, you need to look at that 4 or 5% and say, right, that's the starting point for where I want the dividends to be. Any lower than that, and it's not great, it's okay. A lot higher than that, obviously, also be slightly cautious. That's to do with, are they giving back too much money? Will they be able to sustain that in the long time? Probably not. So dividend yield is something to look for. The other thing to look for when looking at dividends is the dividend growth. Now again, this is in a normal scenario. Now at the moment, lots of big companies and small companies are suspending their dividend payment for the year. That's in a direct response to the current climate that we're in, the uncertainty and the unknown, and we don't know, nobody knows how long this is going to last for. But normally you'd look at companies and you'd want to see the dividend being paid year after year after year. That's a good solid grounding for that. If they've missed out dividend payments whatever in a year and then started again, it's not quite so secure. There's obviously been problems with their balance sheet in between that, so that's one thing to look out for. But also, in an ideal world, you'd want the dividends to also increase over time, so therefore your income from those would increase over time. And normally companies do try to do that. It might only be pennies, but it's dividend growth there, and that's important as well. If a dividend for whatever reason has, say, been halved or stopped under normal circumstances, I'd say be wary of that. because the company themselves have had to reduce the amount of money they're giving back, which normally means that their profit is down on where they expected or where they had hoped for. And again, kind of cash flow there comes into play. So two different things to look out for in terms of dividends: the dividend yields and the dividend growth. And maybe a third would be how long they've paid out for. There are things called blue chip companies which have paid out dividends for like loads of years, some of them over 50 years, you know, the kind of the companies, you know, that probably will be able to survive whatever. The other thing to talk about is dividends within funds. So if you invest in a fund, you are investing in lots of different companies under an umbrella of a fund. That's the point of them. So that instead of just investing in one company, so say Disney, which is more risky, you can invest in a fund that has 100 different companies within it, and the fund kind of switches and changes depending on how those companies are doing, and the risk in that sense is much lower. And actually most of the time that's what we should probably, unless you've got lots of money spare, be investing in. But also they also pay out dividends. So funds normally pay out dividends once a year. Some of them do pay out twice, some of them do pay out quarterly, so 4 times a year, but the majority seem to pay out once a year. And that is a collection of all these different companies within that fund kind of pulled together and paid out. But again, for dividends, you have to look at the dividend yield. Some of these funds, although they're less risky, the dividend yield is much lower because it's less risky, if that makes sense. So you need to decide in your investing journey what you're kind of aiming for. It's probably a good idea to balance the two. I have a mix of different companies and funds to kind of balance the risk a bit more, but that is totally up to you. You need to do your own research for that. I cannot advise in individual shares or in funds. I'm not a financial advisor. However, you can do lots of research, but with funds they are much less active. You can buy into one and just let it go and kind of sit there, because the fund manager, the person who runs the fund, if you like, does all the hard work for you. And so long as it doesn't suddenly all drop off, current circumstances have like ignored, then it does all the work for you. Whereas if you invest in individual shares, so again say Disney, you do have to be slightly more active in keeping up with their kind of news reports, if you like. And the good thing about dividends, because again in funds you have to decide if you pick an income fund which pays dividends out or an accumulation fund which doesn't, it's all kind of reinvested into the stock price. So with dividends you are looking at creating that income stream. Whether you reinvest that's a different matter, but dividends themselves are an income that you can use to be paid into your bank account, or to reinvest and kind of make your pot a bit bigger. But dividends are essentially a pot of money that is paid back by the company to investors, to shareholders, to say thank you, but also to share in the profits because their company is doing well. That's what dividends are. And you might start off small. I think my first dividend payment for a month was like £2 something. It is a bit of a slow and steady game unless you have lots of extra money to put in, then great. Dividend income and dividend growth income is a slow and steady game, but eventually the reward should be really good. So that's a little summary about what dividends are. I've got lots of investing videos coming up to help people try and feel confident about maybe giving it a go. It isn't as scary as perhaps it might seem, and sometimes the best way is to kind of just dive in and get started and learn as you go. But yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know down below if there's anything else you want me to cover in terms of dividends, and I will see you again very soon.